Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday. Thank you for tuning in. Nice to see you, Niall.
Great to see you too,
Good
Robby.
weekend you had?
I did have a relaxing weekend. And yourself?
Yes, I had a lot of fun. My brother was in town. We saw the sights. We went to some holiday parties. We played a lot of board games, as our viewers know how much I like my very nerdy Dungeons and Dragons style games. We had a lot of fun.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Now, a lot of stuff to get to as always. So what is on your radar, Robby?
Well, Joe Biden's unprecedented move to pardon his son, Hunter Biden, for any and all crimes he committed or may have committed for the last decade could go down in history as one of the worst decisions he ever made during his presidency. Now, if in the next few weeks he preemptively pardons, say, Anthony Fauci, just to stop Republicans from examining whether the doctor is criminally liable for COVID-19's origins or lied to Congress about what he knew, that would be even worse. But last week, Biden issued a commutation, not a full pardon, although the result is effectively the same, that is maybe not as incendiary as his decision to pardon his son, but it's no less controversial. Indeed, this individual who was commuted was convicted of financial crimes that are far more serious than Hunter's. Now, I speak, of course, of Michael Conahan, a former Pennsylvania judge who perpetrated the infamous Kids for Cash scheme. Conahan was among 1,500 convicts whose sentences were commuted by Biden. These people had been released from prison and placed under house arrest 4 years ago due to the realities of the pandemic, but they were set to return to prison eventually. CJ Ciaramella, a reporter and colleague of mine at Reason Magazine, writes that very few of these released prisoners have indeed reoffended, and look, if they aren't a danger to the community, it certainly saves the taxpayers money if we don't send them back to prison. But Ciaramella writes that Conahan's crimes were so odious, he should have gotten special consideration by the White House. Now, for those who don't recall this particular case, Conahan was convicted of taking bribes from a for-profit juvenile detention facility. In other words, he was paid to send kids to juvie, even in cases that did not merit that outcome. Teens who appeared in his courtroom didn't get a fair hearing because the juvenile detention facilities were paying him millions of dollars to send kids there. Now, in 2011, Conahan was investigated, charged, convicted, and sentenced to 17 years behind bars. But during the pandemic, he argued for compassionate release on grounds that he was an older man in prison, in danger of contracting COVID, and thus dying from it. So his release was granted, and he was placed under house arrest, supposedly until the pandemic was over. Well, the pandemic is definitely over, but Conahan is not returning to prison. His sentence has been commuted. This news has come as a shock to victims of Conahan's criminal actions. Sandy Fonzo, her son, was sent to jail at age 17 by Conahan, and he later committed suicide. Fonzo is speaking out now, telling the media that Conahan's actions destroyed families, including mine, and my son's death is a tragic reminder of the consequences of his abuse of power. This pardon feels like an injustice for all of us who still suffer. Right now, I am processing and doing the best I can. Well, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro strongly criticized Biden for issuing this commutation. Let's watch his reaction.
So I'll offer these thoughts as an outsider, not privy to all the information he looked at. But I do feel strongly that President Biden got it absolutely wrong and created a lot of pain here in northeastern Pennsylvania. This was not only a black eye on the community, the Kids for Cash scandal, but it also affected families in really deep and profound and sad ways. Some children took their lives because of this. Families were torn apart. There was all kind of mental health issues and anguish that came as a result of these corrupt judges deciding they wanted to make a buck off a kid's back. Frankly, I thought the sentence that the judge got was too light. And the fact that he's been allowed out over the last years because of COVID, was on house arrest, and now has been granted clemency, I think is absolutely wrong. He should have been in prison for at least the 17 years that he was sentenced to by a jury of his peers. He deserves to be behind bars, not walking as a free man.
good for Shapiro for calling out Biden. It's actually even worse than that, though, because note that in the remarks he just gave, he said at the beginning, well, look, I haven't reviewed all the facts that Biden looked at. But Team Biden is defending the commutation on grounds that they didn't actually look at the specific facts of this case. That's right. A Biden administration official told Politico, essentially, don't blame us. We're not paying all that much attention. Incredible. Now, by the way, what is occupying Biden's attention these days? Is the president staying up to date on the situation in Syria, the war between Ukraine and Russia, the allegations of mysterious drones over New Jersey? Anything? Hello? Do we even have a president right now? Bueller? Team Biden seems to be spending a lot more mental effort and energy on pardons for key friends, allies, maybe family members, than they are willing to exert on practically any other issue. Oh well. So if I recall, you were also fairly outraged about this commutation. This is a real nonpartisan one,
Sure.
just a very horribly unethical thing this judge did that really harmed a lot of young people, and I understand compassionate release and not overcrowding our prisons with nonviolent offenders, but this would have been helpful to send a message to people who work in our criminal justice system that you cannot behave this way, because the kind of leniency that he's been showed, he did not show to people in his courtroom because he was being paid off.
Right.
So, and Team Biden could have they're not even arguing, well, we looked at it and we decided their argument here was, we didn't look at it that closely, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are really tragic human consequences to all of this. And in your radar, you mentioned the woman Sandy Fonzo, whose son had been placed into detention unnecessarily as part of this corrupt deal that the judge had, and an unwitting victim who ended up, unfortunately, dying by suicide. Terrible. The state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, had to vacate hundreds and hundreds of convictions or sentences because they were part of this whole corrupt deal. I'm not going to defend the Biden administration in commuting this guy's sentence. I think, firstly, I wouldn't have commuted his sentence, but also more to the point, the kind of cavalier or reckless approach of just not examining each commutation seems very, very bizarre to me and not really defensible. And I think it's completely legitimate to say, like, to question how they can turn around and say, well, we just decided we were going to commute 1,500 sentences. The specifics don't really matter. I mean, obviously, that's the whole point of the criminal justice system. The specifics actually do matter.
Yeah, Josh Shapiro gave some strong remarks there, saying that when he does this as the governor of the state, he looks at all the facts, he pores over them, and it's so important to do that. Kind of maybe a quasi-presidential moment for him. We talked about whether he's going to distinguish himself from Team Biden. He either didn't say anything or was very slow to say anything about the Hunter Biden one. But this was a case where I'm glad he is speaking up.
Yeah, and just one thing on this whole picture, which is maybe the point where you and I would disagree. Of course, this corruption of the judge and another judge in that system emanated from the fact that there is and was a for-profit prison system, separate from the public or state-run prison system. And it's notable to me that the element of the Department of Justice that deals with juvenile detentions said in its latest figures, which go back to 2021, that Pennsylvania has a higher number of juveniles in private prisons, or I should say a higher share of juveniles in private prisons than any other state. 49% of the incarcerated juveniles in Pennsylvania in that year were in a private for-profit facility, and I do think that is part of this picture also.
Well, look, I've seen arguments, I care about the quality of living in prisons. I've seen arguments that, I'm sure some people, liberals on the left, make arguments that the quality is worse in private prisons. I've seen arguments to the contrary, that they're worse in some cases, they're better in other cases. Certainly, I would say if there's a financial incentive being created to send more people to prison unnecessarily, then yes, that's a very bad thing. Of course, the leverage here that was on this was corrupt regardless of the mechanism of the prison, because the judge can't be making this decision based on him profiting. But if it's creating, I guess if it's creating pressure in legislators even to over-criminalize because the private prison industry is lobbying them, then that would be a bad thing. Although, again, the problem is not so much prison itself or the way it's run, but the financial incentives at play.
Yes, but I think the financial incentive is inherent to that system. In other words, if you have a for-profit prison company, it is always going to be in that company's financial interest to maximize the number of incarcerated people. And so I do think that there are elements in the sphere of society and the public interest that just shouldn't be up for for-profit corporations.
Well, we'll have to debate that further at a later date. Much more rising to come today. Please stay tuned.